Today we'll be talking about 10 lessons from transacting. So for my first year in transacting, these are some lessons that I learned, both good and bad. Good, but what I mean by good is that I did the right thing in that situation, and it turned out and saved my butt from bad things happening. And then some lessons that I learned from making mistakes that I learned from that I won't make in the future because I went through that process. But before we jump into that, just want to rehash the ROE for the meeting. So if you're in a safe situation, as in not driving or anything like that, if you could have your camera on, it just shows me that you're participating. Ask questions and share your input. So if you have some experiences, whether you were the agent or if you were on the buy side or sell side of a transaction, you could have been the client. But if you learn something that's similar to what I'm talking about, or there's any kind of lesson learned you want to share, feel free to chime in either by unmuting yourself using the unmute button, or you can raise your hand using the emotions, the reactions button. And you can also just type in the chat box. And lastly, make sure you're taking notes, because these are some of the lessons that cost me a few bucks, and it could save you a few bucks by not making those same mistakes. And also wanted to congratulate Marshawn Tatum for passing the test and joining EXP, and also Angela Canizales. Are you guys here, Angela or Marshawn? Feel like sharing any words of wisdom on the test, the licensing process?
Hi, this is Angela. I am here. I guess the only advice I would have is some things that have been shared already is just make sure that you show up early so that you're not stressing about parking or where to go. And another thing that I found super helpful was studying things that was specific to Florida. I know there's a lot of things floating around for, real estate exams, and some of it doesn't even apply to the state that you're testing in. So it was very helpful to me to find Florida specific testing guides and things like that.
That's great input. Thank you. So anyone in Florida, and really just any state in general, make sure you're looking at the specific content. I know some states have just one test where it combines everything. There's no state specific portion, but if you're in a state that has a state specific portion, make sure you're looking at that material. I know for Hawaii, there was a lot of questions about basically when you're working as a property manager, but there's no property management. So I didn't pay attention to that, but I did look at a bunch of practice exams that had state specific stuff to prepare for that. Alrighty, moving on to the lesson. And I'm going to drop, can anyone in the chat see the PDF that I dropped? If not, I'll drop it again. Just type no or thumbs down or something.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Okay. I'm going to drop it again here. I'll drop it in PDF and PNG format just to make it easier to see. And this will be what I'll be going off of, but I won't be displaying it on the screen. All right, so I made this little flyer in Canva, one of my favorite places to go to make stuff instead of wasting time on PowerPoint trying to reinvent the wheel. And yes, again, this is the 10 lessons from transacting my first year. The first one, top of that list, is do a buyer's consultation. So you might think, like, I had a good conversation when I first connected with this person, or maybe it's one of your friends from the military, et cetera. And you think it'll we'll start shopping. We'll just figure it out. And you'll do a few showings. You might see a couple houses that they like, but there's aspects about those houses that they didn't like. So you continue to shop and you're like, yeah, no big deal. I got plenty of time. This is like my only client. So I can just pour all my time and energy into this person. A few more showings, days of showings go by, and then a few weeks, and you're like, all right, what's going on? This person just keeps on finding new things that they don't like about the houses. But all that could be prevented if you just sit down talk to them. Preferably if it's a couple, you want to have both of them there, and have both of their input on what they're looking for, because sometimes I know if I was the only person deciding on what house my wife and I were going to buy, it'd look a lot different than if she was there. And so it's important to have both people there so that they're both on the same page. You and then all three of you guys understand what you're looking for. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time, energy, gas, driving around looking at houses that just aren't the right fit. Any feedback from anybody else that's experienced that as an agent or just as a buyer or seller? All right, moving on to the next point. So the next one is to know your vendors, and that's the third-party team members, and make sure you inform your clients about the risks of using other vendors. And so in particular, I'm referring to home inspectors and termite inspectors, or any kind of inspectors you're using for the transaction. So the specific transaction that comes to mind is actually my very first transaction. I was the sole agent representing the buyers, and we already had, our team has a list of 3 home inspectors that we use most often. We know they do a good job. They're not going to miss anything. And I told my client about
That's creepy.
home inspectors, and he's like, yeah, I looked at the reviews for them, but I was looking at the reviews for this other business and I would like to use them instead. And so being new, I was like, okay, sure. Yeah, no big deal. But I should have been like, okay, you run the risk of, I don't know how they work, but you say you've vetted them. So it's ultimately your decision. So that's fine. But if I would have maybe pressed a little more and like, hey, these people have already I know that they know what they're doing. And so I recommend these people instead. Fast forward to the home inspection walkthrough. So for those of you that haven't dealt with the home inspector before, the home inspector will typically do his or her thing. It'll take like 3 to 4 hours where they're turning on all the lights, the water, looking at all the electrical stuff, all the roof, everything. And they should be looking at as many details as possible to identify if there's any issues with the home. And then so we're there and so they do their thing. And then at the very end, they do a walkthrough where they physically point out every little detail about the house, like things to be aware of for continued maintenance, but more importantly, any issues that there might be with the house. And so as we're doing the walkthrough, we're like very obvious things like one of the fans wasn't working. Like we tried to switch, everything wasn't working, lights or the actual movement. And the buyer, my client, was like, what's wrong with this thing here? And the inspector was like, oh, I didn't notice that. And so I'm just like, this isn't going to go well. He didn't miss anything major on that home inspection, but it was a lesson learned both for myself and for my client to make sure that you're working with vendors that know what they're doing. They're a new quality job, and you're, especially when you are the one recommending them, you want to make sure that you've, like, when you're first starting out, like, you can try to ask somebody if you can shadow them for when they do a home inspection or something like that. But for the most part, these are situations where you're going to learn just from experience, from being in the business, or asking other teammates, other peers within the business for referrals for those vendors. All right. Anybody want to chime in on that? Anybody's have experiences with vendors that were good or bad or anything like that? Okay. Moving on to the next point. Remember to point out the location of the basics. So my wife and I, we were always laughing because there'd be the most random things that we'd forget to point out throughout the time, like that we're house shopping. Because when you're cycling through, 10, 20 houses, you look at the layout of the house, look at the appliances in the kitchen, stuff like that. You make sure there's no leaks under the sink, and then you move on to the next house that you're showing them. And then when you finally make an offer, you forget about the small things that make a big difference to like the daily life of the client. So where the mailbox is, where the community office, or if there's any kind of amenities that are available to the community, you want to identify where those are. Casey said linen closets. Yeah, it's important because there might be some like secret compartments somewhere. Do you have a specific scenario for that, Casey?
Yeah, so being in the military, my wife and I, we moved around a lot, and I couldn't tell you how many times we would go in a house that was given to us on base or something, and it was just like, we don't have a linen closet, so then we're carrying those like drawers into your bathroom, and it takes up space. So when we moved into our house here, like one of the first questions was like, I want to see the laundry room, and I want to see the linen closets, and so I don't know, just like little things like that, and overhead lights. Had a couple of houses where there were no overhead lights or ceiling fans. So just little things like that over the years that we kind of figured out that were important to us in the everyday function of our life. So
yeah, that's a great point. And then that kind of goes back to the buyer's consultation. So when you sit down with the couple, you want to write down every little detail of what they're saying, but you want to make a list of what are the must-haves, what are the big things that you always look for in a house, and then that'll come into play when you're physically shopping around for houses. You want to identify where those things are, point it out to them, make sure they know where they are, because yeah, in some situations it could be like a make or break. Like if the like people that follow feng shui type things, like if the bathroom is located in a weird spot compared to the bedroom or to the kitchen, that could be a deal breaker. But if they didn't notice it when they're first cycling through houses, and then later on in the transaction, they realize that it could be a big red flag that'll mess up your transaction. And then Joshua said, fresh painted ceiling concealed a leaky roof for me. Yeah, that's a great point right there. And that's one place where having a good home inspector will come into play. I had a transaction where to the naked eye, you couldn't tell there was a leak in the roof, but the home inspector uses an infrared camera. And so he goes through the house and takes pictures throughout of the ceiling, walls, etc. And using that infrared camera, he was able to identify that there was a temperature difference, like in a circular pattern on the roof, that you couldn't see with your eye. And the owner actually didn't even realize that it was there. But what was happening was the toilet was the wax seal was kind of broken, and so the water was seeping out and below, within the toilet, through the floor onto the floor, the ceiling below. But there wasn't any kind of indication around the toilet on the second floor because it was properly sealed with the caulking around the edge of the toilet. And then, the home inspector pointed that out, and that saved us a lot. Otherwise, they would have moved in, realized their roof was about to fall apart once that water really soaked in. But good home inspector saved our butts. Josh Henkel, do you want to share any details on that?
All right, I'm at Pat Boys, so forgive me. I'm still waiting on a tire alignment. No, I did have, I shortchanged, and I used the previous person I was trying to buy. I used their home inspection, and the agent gave it to me, but it was kind of a little hard to read. Whoever wrote it kind of was a doctor at one point in their life or something. And I saw a leak, and I just, blew past it. I was kind of in a crunch, PCS from Tampa to PA, looked at a bunch of houses, and I was like, all right, I just bit the bullet and took it. Fortunate for me, my brother-in-law was a roofer, and so he came up there, and those PA roofs are like this, and he's like, come on up here. I'm good, but he fixed it up for me for nothing, and maybe a steak dinner I think it cost me, so we're good to go.
Nice. Yeah, good thing it worked out nicely.
Yeah,
that's another good point. Not using or like at least being aware of the risk of a previous home inspection. Because if you don't know who that home inspector was, garbage in is garbage out. But doing a good scrub. Like if you need to save the $500 or $600, then definitely do that. But you do run the risk of the home inspector not seeing things that you pay particular attention to. All right, so the next point get documentation for any work requiring county or HOA approval. This was from a few transactions, actually. One situation, we were in escrow, we'd been shopping around for a while, finally found a house that the buyers loved. We went into escrow with them, made an offer, got accepted. And so what the situation was, they had a patio outside with a concrete foundation, and it hadn't been approved by the county. And so that might be a big deal in other states. I know in Arizona, it's not really a big deal, like the backlog of permitting and stuff. But here in Hawaii, it's like 6 months to a year to get permits approved. And so at this particular house, they'd already been waiting a few weeks. They had fallen out of escrow a couple of times because of that. But the agent was promising, like, yeah, this permit is going to get approved really soon, so we can open up escrow. You don't have to deposit earnest money or anything. We can just hold off until these permits are approved, but it's definitely going to happen soon. A few weeks went by, we kept following up, still no word on the permits. And then finally the buyers were kind of losing their patience of waiting, and we were kind of losing our patience for them, because after a certain point, your interest rate, especially right now, it's a critical time with interest rates, your interest rate lock will expire. And so either the lender, if they're really nice, they'll pay you the fee for the lock extension, or it's going to have to come out of your buyer's pocket. And then, so what ended up happening, we backed out of the escrow, found them another house. Fast forward, I think it was like five or 6 months later, we were kind of keeping tabs on that property, and it took about 6 months for that property to be approved by the county. And so that could have cost our client thousands of dollars if they continue to extend their lock. So make sure when you see any kind of indication like that, like permits are waiting approval, or flooring has not been approved by the HOA type thing, make sure you get approval for that. And one way to protect yourself against, or in those situations, like if they're like 100% committed to that house, is you do withholding in escrow. And so another transaction, permits haven't been approved for the overall renovation because it was just a complete redo of the house. And we're having the seller keep $50,000 in escrow until the permits are approved, because sometimes the county will come back and say, hey, you need to make these adjustments. You need to hire a contractor to adjust these aspects of the design. And so that money that's left in escrow can be used towards that. And then also, if it turns out, and the time limit that we put on that escrow withholding was 6 months. And so if it isn't approved within that 6 month period, then that $50,000 will actually go to the buyer. So it'll be a big win for them if that were to happen. And then they would still have to put the work in to get the permits approved if anything that came up, but definitely a big win if they got that $50K. Another thing to keep in mind with that is, like I said, the HOA flooring approval. So another transaction, the sellers said that the flooring was in the process of being approved, and then just before the transaction closed, it was approved at a board meeting. And now 4 months later, the HOA is writing a letter to my client saying, hey, this flooring is not approved. You need to have it removed within 2 weeks or you're going to be fined. And so my client called me like, hey, do you know what this is about? And I was like, do they like sneak in your house and like take pictures? And what they're doing is, like, from months and months ago, they're looking back to their files, probably didn't see that it was already approved. And they say, oh, we got to follow up with this person and we got to find them. And if you're not careful, and if it's a brand new first time home buyer, they might see that threat in that letter, hey, remove this floor, or and sometimes it might have an option where it's like you can pay the $500 fine or whatever it is. And if they're not wise and they don't think to kind of defend themselves, they might just go ahead and pay that, or they might go ahead and have the floor removed when they don't really have to. So make sure you keep the documentation for like meeting minutes where those types of things are approved, to protect yourself and your client from those types of situations. Any lessons learned from anyone else in the audience? All right, Next one, if there's a will, there's a way. So another transaction, we've been shopping around for a while, made some offers on other properties, missed out, and then finally found this property that they loved because the layout, the option to rent out a portion of the house to generate some passive income. And so one lender who had, this is kind of like in a situation in the point where rates were all over the place. So it's kind of understandable that like the 1 week they're approved for 1.5, the next week they're approved for like 1.2 million. And so it was kind of all over the place. So it's understandable like that it was kind of inconsistent with the lender. But fast forward to when we're in the middle of the transaction waiting for conditional loan approval, and the lender says, hey, this can't happen. It's just numbers don't work out. They can't be approved for this amount. And I was just like, no, I think I didn't tell this to him, but I was thinking to myself, because sometimes people just don't want to put the work in. And I understand it, because like if you are specialized in doing one thing, and if you do those simple tasks that takes maybe 2 hours, and another task is going to take you 10 hours, that 10-hour task, you're losing out, on 80% that you could be making on doing 5 more or 4 more of that simple task that only takes 2 hours. So I understand where he's coming from, but he basically said this can't be done. And in my mind, I was like, we'll find another lender that can figure things out and is willing to put the work in to make this transaction work out. So I actually talked to the seller's agent, and I was like, hey, we're bouncing around to looking at different lenders because the first lender said that it's not going to work out. And then he actually said, hey, I have this lender. He's been in the business for over 30 years. If this guy can't make it happen, then nobody can. And so I was like, yeah, sure. We're open to anything. These clients of mine, they love this house. They want this thing to happen. So we connect them with that lender, and the lender had to do some real deep dive into the weeds to see like what kind of debts they had to pay off, what kind of money they would need to bring for the down payment, all that stuff. But fast forward, it took like another month and a half for that whole process, but they got their house. And like other teammates that were involved in the transaction, they're kind of like, when they first heard from that first lender, oh, this isn't going to work out, they're kind of like, all right, I guess this isn't going to happen. Let's break the news to the clients. But I was persistent, and I knew that it could work out. And I went the extra mile to find a way to make it happen, and it worked out. So just keep that in mind for transactions, and that some lenders, some vendors, they stick to their cookie cutter situations. And if it deviates from that, they might tell you no. So don't necessarily take no for an answer. Which moves on to the next point, which is know your lenders and how they operate. So the same great lender that was from that transaction that said no, because he likes to stick to the basics and make a lot of money. He's very successful from doing that, so I don't blame him for that. But he referred us to another lender, and knowing his background, I was like, okay, this other lender is probably really good. This is a separate transaction. And I was just trying out different lenders. And so I was like, okay, he's backing, he's giving me his word that this other lender is really good. So yeah, why not? Everything was going smoothly until about 2 weeks into the escrow. And the title company actually reaches out to us and is like, hey, we can't get a hold of the lender. Is there any way that you can reach out to the person? And I was like, it's a little weird. So reach out to the person, answer the phone right away. And then a few other things like that happened where, so my wife is also an agent. She does the transaction management type stuff. And so she reaches out to the lender regarding the conditional loan approval. And typically if you have a good lender and they're on top of their stuff, you're not having to babysit them, they will send you the conditional loan approval and final loan approval and all those things as they need them. Or if they're waiting on documents from your client and the client isn't responding, they'll let you know so you can keep the transaction flowing smoothly. And so my wife reached out to the lender to ask about the conditional loan approval, and then a day later, they're like, "Oh yeah, here it is. Here's conditional loan approval," and so then that was the kind of strike two for that situation. And then not to spend too much time on this transaction, but it ended up taking we closed about a month late from our contractual closing date because that lender was doing whatever that lender wanted to do, and just taking sweet time and not making it a priority to make this transaction close, which is fine. Like if you want to, live life and do whatever you want to do, that's fine. But as agents, be aware of those types of situations. Like if you have expectations for how fast you want them to respond, or just closing a transaction on time, make sure that that's communicated, and make sure you're aware of how that lender operates. Because if that lender was on the previous transaction I was talking to you guys about with the withholding and all that stuff, that transaction would not have happened. So just keep that in mind for when you're shopping for lenders, and definitely have multiple lenders in your pocket, because some will specialize in certain types of loans, like the VA loan, and others will specialize in conventional or USDA. So definitely have a Rolodex of lenders that you can work with. Anyone want to chime in on that? Any good or bad experiences with lenders? Logan Brandon, he says, I have a question about the loan bouncing around after purchase. So what's your question, Logan?
So my first purchase in Kings Bay, Georgia, it was initially financed by a smaller, like less nationwide kind of lender. And then it bounced around a couple times afterwards until it finally ended at Chase. And I was wondering, I wasn't really prepared for that as the buyer at that time. And the method that they were informing me that it was bouncing between these different lenders over the course of 5 or 6 months, the first 5 or 6 months was just via mail. So I wasn't expecting mail from these different companies I had never heard of, these banks, these financial institutions that I didn't know of. Is that something you should want to prepare your clients for? Or is that something that is less likely to happen?
No, definitely. I would say it's more likely to happen nowadays, because the big thing right now is using the broker model for your lender. And so the way that works is this broker works with multiple banks, like all the big name banks, UWM, United Wholesale Mortgage, Freedom Mortgage, like all these other banks, basically the people that are actually lending the money. Mm-hmm. And so they shop around. Hey, can you offer this interest rate? This person's borrowing this much money. They have this credit score. The bank says, like, oh, we can't do it because their credit score is too low. And then so they go to another bank. And so what ends up happening is one of those banks eventually basically takes on that debt and funds that loan. And then they go back and sell it off to another bank, like the Fannie Mae type thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's a great point you bring up. Like, you need to make sure you're educating your buyers on that, because they might, and it really should be the lender, but ultimately, like, you're the hub of communication and
the point of contact.
Yeah.
So I just wasn't expecting it. I had no idea I was having to create profiles on all these different financial institution websites to pay my mortgage and keep up to date on how that was looking. So it was just kind of a habit. I didn't know to expect that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And when I first bought, I wasn't expecting that either. And my lender might have told me to expect that, but I wasn't. And so what can happen is you pay your mortgage and you mail it in, because sometimes that first payment has to be mailed in.
Yep.
And then by the time it arrives to that bank, they no longer own your debt, and it's already bounced on to someone else. And then now the bank that owns your debt is coming after you. Hey, why are you a month late on your first mortgage? Yep. And then it can turn into a huge hassle where you're having to sit on the phone for hours on hold, waiting to talk to the bank. So yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Sure.
But the lenders that I work with they'll point that out and say, hey, you're going to get a letter in the mail. Don't pay that bill. Just like hold off until like your second payment or something like that. They'll educate them on that. But yeah, definitely good thing to keep in mind. Next point, always aim to close early because you never know what curveballs will create a delay. So in parentheses on that point, I said verify tax records for address. So this particular situation that I was thinking of was that so what happened is it was a condominium parcel with the last letter that means CPR. But basically here in Hawaii, depending on zoning, if the zoning allows it, you can split up a piece of land that you own. So there was this house on a good sized piece of land, and the buyer was like a house flipper investor type person. And they split the property in half and they built 2 structures on it. And what ended up happening is the address was just all over the place. And I really don't know who was to blame, but it's just a matter of like verifying with like whatever's in your area is the most accurate thing to look to, like for human beings, it's our social security number to find your identity, and for houses out here in Hawaii, it's the TMK tax map key. And so you want to look at that and look at the address, make sure like where the letters are, because it was like a 123 B Main Street, and then in different locations on the internet, it showed 123 Main Street Unit B. And then there's another one that was like 123A Main Street Unit B. And it's like, none of this makes any sense. And what that actually delayed the closing by a week because, the title company was asking about it. And I hadn't really noticed it because the MLS, a lot of times you trust the MLS because that's like the official, like where people are putting information, but just keep in mind the people that are putting in information are agents just like you and I. And if they're not paying attention to the details, they might type in some inaccurate information in there. It could be like the amount of money that's owed every month for the association fee, or what kind of amenities are available, or like who covers what in an emergency situation or like insurance type thing. And so you want to trust but verify. So look into the details of that stuff, but if you aim to close early, you'll be prepared to deal with any kind of situations like that might come up. All right, next point. We're already halfway through that, or must be through these last ones. So be ready to adapt to how your clients communicate. Some check email, some don't. So the particular transaction I'm thinking of, this couple, they just basically didn't check their email. They're a younger couple, so maybe checking email is kind of like an older person type thing for them, and they prefer text message. And it just took a little bit of learning for us to realize that like anytime we send them an email, we would send them a text message saying, "Hey, we sent you an email." So just keep that in mind when every situation will be different because just how people communicate. Some people will only like to talk on the phone at all for whatever reason. Some people will only talk on the phone. So just be prepared to deal with those different situations. Trust but verify price quotes used in negotiations. So we're helping some sellers, and the buyer's agent came to us with a quote, said, "Hey, this is what was quoted that's needed for the plumbing repair." And it was like $10,000 for work that we had previously got a quote, and the previous quote from another plumber was like $2,000. And we were like, how's this plumber is saying that it costs 5 times as much? And I was looking at the quote, and I noticed it didn't look professional. Like it just had the plumber's name, his phone number, and then it had the information on what was needed to be repaired in the kitchen, and then the bathroom, and the items for the bathroom were just copy and pasted for the other bathroom. And so then I decided to look up the person's license number. And then so I went on the county website, looked at the person's name. Turns out the person wasn't even licensed. So depending on the rules for your state, here in Hawaii, I believe the limit is $2,000 that an unlicensed person can do. After that, they have to be licensed in order to do that kind of work. And so that we ended up saving our client, $8,000 there, because if we would have given them a credit or paid for those repairs, there would have been $10,000. But just having that little eye for those kind of details and just verifying the information instead of just taking it at face value. It's really important. And the last lesson that I learned is that there's always a lesson to be learned, but don't beat yourself up. You can't make everyone happy. Referenced a Bible verse there. In the days that we're living in now, there's a lot of harsh people, a lot of selfish, have no care for being a decent human being. So keep that in mind, because this transaction that I'm thinking of, we are going above and beyond for them, answering every question immediately, super responsive with them. And then out of nowhere, they were complaining to our team leader that we weren't answering their questions. And we were just like, this is really weird, because we've been answering every single one of their questions. But some people, they just won't like you just because of who you are, or, maybe they had a bad day and they all of a sudden decided they didn't like you anymore. So just keep that in mind. Don't take it too hard, because, you've heard the statistics on the real estate business, the Pareto principle type thing, where only 20% of realtors make it past like their first 2 or 3 years. And it's because it's a tough job. Pays well, but it's definitely tough work. And especially if you're doing it right. So just keep that in mind and don't beat yourself up when those obstacles come your way. All right, that's all I got. Welcome to stick around, ask questions if you have any. But aside from that, have a wonderful day.